So, welcome back, everyone. We hope everyone had a refreshing break. Next up, we have another exciting panel on shaping tomorrow, the future of mobility in India. Joining us is Sunjay Kapur, chairman of Sona Comstar. As a leading figure in the automotive industry, Sanjay has driven significant innovations in mobility solutions, contributing to the transformation of the transportation sector in India. We also have Professor Miles Allen, a distinguished climate scientist and professor of geosystem sciences. Miles' research on climate change and sustainable energy solutions is pivotal in addressing environmental challenges and shaping future mobility. Moderating today's session is Sandeep Bhamma, founder of Green Frontier Capital. Sandeep's expertise in sustainable investment and his commitment to green initiatives make him an ideal guide for our conversation on the future of mobility. Please join me in welcoming Sunjay Kapur, Professor Miles Allen, and our moderator, Sandeep Bhamma.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. So welcome, everyone. Obviously, very, very happy to have two leaders who are will be able to talk to the future of mobility and sustainability. So the questions that I've actually prepared for today are in the context of a larger sustainability theme. And Sanjay, as someone with extensive automotive industry experience, I'd like to kind of kick off this conversation with you. What role do you think emerging technologies such as electrical vehicles and automotive, autonomous vehicles have on the future of mobility?
Yeah,
especially in the context of India.
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. So the automotive industry is highly disruptive, and it's disrupting quicker than any other industry that we're familiar with because of the kind of change that's required, not just from customers but from regulation as well. So there's a lot of regulatory change that's driving the kind of technologies that are being adopted in the automotive industry. So you talk about electrification, you talk about alternate fuels, you talk about the fact that now there's also different types of mobility. So when we look at automotive today, it's actually mobility. You look at electric VTOLs, vertical landings and takeoffs. So there's all kinds of technologies that are being adopted in automotive, and I think what we're going to see in the future is, whether people like it or not, we're going to see more EVs. I think there's a lot of debate about the kind of energy going into fuel EVs, the cost of EV, the cost of actually on the environment in building electric vehicles. There's a lot of conversation about that as well. But as far as I can see from a component industry, and that's really where we're in the component space. We're seeing disruption, which the kind of disruption we've never seen before in terms of technology, even when it comes to whether it's telematics, it's connectivity. You talk about autonomous. I think autonomous is also, level 5 is really self-drive, but everything else to get to level 5 is very, very doable and is happening even today. If you look at from the Indian context, the government is putting a lot of money behind electrification, a lot of money behind new technologies by production-linked incentive schemes. We've got PLI, which we call PLI, schemes for ACC, which is the battery technology. You've got production-linked incentive schemes for drones, for solar. Again, that goes into the fact that infrastructure needs to be green as well, as they call it. They want to have 70% of all commercial vehicles by 2030 to be EV. There's a scheme to 10,000 buses in 181 smart cities, and that's a very small number in the grand scheme of things, but everything's moving in that direction. So I think that the automotive industry, which I'm now coining as the mobility industry, is going to have to make a lot of investments. There's a lot of push for Make in India, but not just Make in India. I think Design in India is also extremely important. So a lot of push that's going to go through the supply chain to see how across the board we can adopt technologies. And I think this is a great platform. I was talking to someone earlier and see how academia and industry can really sort of connect with each other and build something together so that we can, leverage the technology and leverage the know-how, because the domain expertise lies with us. But the expertise in terms of technology is really where we need that push from academia, and I think it's a great opportunity.
That's great. So Miles, just on a more general level, how critical do you think is the role of the mobility sector in addressing climate change?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And clearly, the mobility sector, I mean, it's a large chunk of global emissions and a growing one. As we decarbonize other easier to decarbonize sectors, it's going to become proportionately a much bigger part of the challenge. And since you were talking about, as it were, terrestrial mobility, I was going to focus on the aviation sector in particular, which is currently a pretty small part of global emissions, but rising rapidly, growing rapidly, and in a country like India, with the enormous distances that people have to cover, it's going to become an ever more significant part of the issue, and it's actually also a very topical issue closer to home for me here in Oxford, in that we in Oxford have set ourselves a goal of net zero by 2035, and at the insistence of people like myself, we were very keen that this should include all of the emissions associated with our activities, which of course, as a global university, has to include, therefore, our mobility around the world, our maintaining our role as a global university. And this is where I wanted really to, with permission, I should stress, steal a line from former Minister Sinha, who you will be hearing from shortly. The former minister mentioned to me that, Minister of State for Aviation, so clearly on top of this brief. And he mentioned to me that he likes to emphasize to people that net zero is net positive. We have to be positive about the transition to net zero. And this is an incredibly important message, particularly here in the UK, where net zero has become is rather very much to my concern, becoming a very divisive issue, not just in the UK, but in Europe, because it's seen as a negative. And I think this is particularly an issue for aviation. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, we had the whole flight shaming movement, and people being told that it's sort of wrong to fly. And I think we need to move beyond that. And I suspect, as a former Minister of Civil Aviation, you would agree with me on this, although I've been looking forward to hearing what you have to say on it. Yeah, fair enough. And we're delighted to have you here. And it's essential that you can. And it's essential that people can travel around the world and come to Oxford to mix with people from all over the world. I mean, this is the glue that keeps our planet together. So it's so important that we maintain that. But we recognize, therefore, in Oxford, many of our students and young people are increasingly sort of anxious about their environmental impact, anxious about the impact of flying. So we need to address it. And we need to work with the aviation industry to work on long-term solutions. And this is where I think, in contrast to the terrestrial automotive industry, if I might frame it that, the aviation industry right now builds, planes are built, you were mentioning how fast the automotive industry can change. Cars don't last very long. Whereas airframe design lasts for decades. You can't change your aviation fleet very quickly. It's even harder, for example, to change the refueling practices in airports, because you've got to literally close down the airport and rebuild it if you wanted to switch to fueling planes on hydrogen and so on. So one thing I think we can be sure about, definitely past 2035, which is when Oxford has a net zero target, and probably well past 2050, we will be flying planes on kerosene. We have to accept that fact. Maybe not all planes, there are interesting developments in electrification of short-haul transport, but long-haul transport will be fueled on fossil fuels for the foreseeable future, which means that carbon dioxide that's coming out the back of the plane is going to have to get dealt with. And right now, the only way of dealing with it sustainably, safely, permanently, is to recapture that carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere and put it back underground. And fortunately, this has been recognized, and people are developing the technology to do it, and it's a real opportunity. And one of the things I think, and it may even feed back, sorry, I'll wrap up, just to sort of throw the ball back to you, it may even feed back to other transport sectors as well, because a little appreciated fact, I feel, in Britain, is the amount we pay in tax on vehicle fuel in the UK exceeds the amount it would cost to recapture every single molecule of CO2 that comes out the tailpipes of our cars and trucks and put it back under the North Sea. So that's quite an interesting, and yet, in the name of climate, we are electrifying our transport fleet. Okay? So when we're all driving electric cars, we won't pay any fuel tax. So that tax is going anyway. So there's a certain cognitive dissonance here. And there's also a lot of tension politically about the speed of transition to electrification. And colleagues, particularly here in the Zero Institute in Oxford, who were working hard on electrification, get a little tense when I point this out, because they're shut up Miles, keep everybody focused on the electrification agenda. In the long term, it's a very good idea to electrify transport. Not just for the climate reason, but for air quality and all sorts of other reasons.
Well, in India, the transition has been quite rapid because most of the electrification has been happening in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler sector.
Absolutely.
And there's a reason for that, because basically you can retrofit the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, so the upfront cost to buy a new vehicle doesn't exist. In that context, what role do you think that the automotive sector in India have on India's sustainability goals, especially in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions?
So I think, one of the big challenges that we face is infrastructure. You talk about the fact that two-wheelers and three-wheelers will go electric, buses will go electric as well. But I think infrastructure is going to be, a huge challenge, and fueling that infrastructure. Today, we're the third largest in terms of renewable, but we also import a lot of, energy. And I think the goal is to go to 10% of global hydrogen output by, I think it's by 2030 or 2030. So I think there's a lot of investment going in that space. And I think that needs to continue to happen. And again, with the fact that technology is changing so rapidly, there's also, this space is also becoming, people need to be more conscious of the kind of technologies we're building. So, when Miles, when you talk about terrestrial, I'm referring to mobility. So I'm saying we're in mobility, which includes drones, which includes VTOLs, because we're making systems for everything, because the world is moving that direction. And then you've got that whole traffic or, all those systems. So how do we make sure that all that is fueled through green energy? And that's really a key role that, so when people talk to me about the fact that automotive is moving from ICE combustion engine to EV, you're going to lose a lot of opportunity. There's also there's a great opportunity to gain in that, because 40% of the vehicle becomes software, right? So there's an opportunity there. Infrastructure, building charging, because the biggest challenge we're facing today with EV is range anxiety. And that's why you're seeing in North America, people go back to hybrid. I mean, I left home with 100%, on my phone, and it's 70 now. And I've charged it once already. I'm already anxious about my phone. So you imagine my car. I need to go back home. I'm like, what happened? So range anxiety is something that is going to have to drive infrastructure development.
So this entire chicken and egg situation in India, people aren't basically transitioning to four-wheelers because there's no charging infrastructure. But the charging infrastructure guys don't want to build the charging infrastructure until there are enough four-wheelers on the road. I think the US has solved that problem quite nicely, because they have this entire vehicle-to-grid system where, because of the dual tariff structure, you can actually charge your car at home at night when electricity tariff rates are at a low. You go back to the office, you put your car back on the grid, and you can actually make money when tariff rates are high. So you arbitrage the price differential. In India, we don't have any such dual tariff structure. So what do you think is going to drive people to actually start driving four-wheelers? So I understand the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler angle is pretty easy, right? You just retrofit and you drive, and your cost savings per kilometer is 75% vis-a-vis an ICE-powered vehicle. But in the four-wheeler segment, What do you think is going to basically drive that transition?
So Sandeep, I think we're moving in a direction which is, today in our company we have solar group captive capacity, what we call, where we've put together a bunch of different units or manufacturing units come together to put solar projects together to distribute. And I think, again, distribution of power is again a challenge. So I think all these things will get built out. I think we have bigger challenges when it comes to fueling electricity through rural India as opposed to vehicles. But the way that I see the automotive industry, and I get asked this question a lot, the OEMs are investing heavily in electrification. And therefore, we're going to go down that path, and therefore infrastructure will get built out.
Got it.
So I'm not worried about it. I think this is a challenge that we can address easily. How to do it in the correct way? We've got green credit programs in India, again, which is related to the carbon credit program that you have in the US, in the EU. So we're moving in that direction, hydrogen storage projects, etc. I think it's all moving in the right direction.
Or you lower the cost of capital, so it becomes cheaper for people to basically spread out the cost over a longer period of time, so that the savings that accrue actually become worth it. From a scientific perspective, what policies do you think governments need to basically introduce to basically drive mobility to address climate change issues? Can you make some suggestions that are generic in nature?
It's back to this sort of challenge of keeping the message positive. I think people don't respond well to being driven, if you see what I mean. I mean, people don't react well to sticks.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges we face here, I don't know, I obviously don't know the situation in India, is that the net zero agenda, particularly for transport, is perceived as very prescriptive. You will buy an electric car by this date, you will have to charge it with this system and so on. And that makes it perceived as, and it may not be true, but it's perceived as regressive in the sense that people, in the States, most people have a driveway. It's therefore straightforward to charge your car at home. In the UK, the majority of the population leaves their car in the street because there is no space for driveways. And, we haven't got to this point yet, but, one can imagine in a few years' time a feature of life being people driving around their neighborhood trying to find a free charging point, and all the stress that's going to sort of generate. So particularly when their rich neighbors with the driveway don't have this problem. People can kind of see this social issue coming down the line. So I think we need to be very careful not to take options off the table, which is why I think we should be, not just for aviation, but for the mobility sector in general, we should be accepting the fact that some of our mobility will still be powered by fossil fuels in 2050. And that doesn't mean we have to give up. It just means that that segment of our mobility sector, their climate impact will have to be neutralized by direct air capture and disposal of the CO2 they generate. And it may just be aviation, or it may be in some countries a combination of aviation and heavy goods, or it may be a matter of powering a chunk of our vehicle fleet with hydrogen. By far, at the moment, by far the cheapest way of generating climate neutral hydrogen is starting with natural gas, but capturing the carbon dioxide and putting it back underground. So that's so-called blue hydrogen. So again, I think we need to be very careful about taking options off the table. Getting to net zero is going to be hard. We make it even harder if we tie one hand behind our backs and say we're not going to use this particular option because it's politically unpalatable. And that is happening a lot in Oxford, in Europe. Perhaps even in parts of Oxford. But certainly in Europe, there is a tendency to sort of make the best the enemy of the good. And I think we need to be much more open-minded about our routes to net zero.
Okay, great. Sunjay, you had mentioned charging infrastructure as a significant challenge that the automotive industry in India is facing as we transition to an electrical sort of platform. for adoption of vehicles. Can you talk about some other challenges that the industry faces, and what are some of the innovative ways in which companies in India are addressing those challenges?
So I think, look, the biggest challenge that we have faced that everyone recognizes is the semiconductor chip issue. And if you looked at what happened in the pandemic, when we went into the pandemic, we were 7% of buying of the semiconductor chips. So we were buying about, I think, $45 billion worth of the $500 billion that was being produced as an automotive industry. When we went into, and the fact is we're at the tail end of the technology when it comes to automotive compared to electronics, and therefore capacity got diverted, and everybody then, I mean, if I walked into an OEM in 2020 and I said, where do you buy chips from? They'd ask me, what are you talking about? Today, people will tell me when there'll be a shortage. I mean, every person in that company can tell me, because it's become so valuable, that product, a commodity, whatever you want to call it. And now we're about 15% of semiconductor chips globally is what we as an automotive industry consume. And it's going to go up to 20%. So this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing when it comes to automotive. I know that we have a business based out of Serbia that does millimeter wave radar sensors, and we're looking at designing fabless chips for the automotive industry, again, because that's a challenge. So we talk about infrastructure when it comes to charging. You talk about batteries, again, cost of batteries, and building that whole sort of that whole ecosystem out is a huge challenge. Green energy, we've already talked about that. And then the great opportunity that we're seeing is the startup ecosystem. And how do you take that startup ecosystem to convert it into real business? That's really where, because what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of services businesses in the startup ecosystem, not enough manufacturing. And if I look at the Indian context, we're at about 15 to 17% of GDP manufacturing, and we need to go up to 25% because this great demographic dividend that we have needs jobs. As we go on in the next 5 to 10 years, we need everybody employed, or most of the people employed, and that's really how we can leverage the demographic dividend. So I think investment in manufacturing, investment in technology, private sector in India is far behind investment in technology than where it should be. If I give you the industry average in the auto component industry, it's 0.5% of revenue. We invest between 3.5% to 6% as a company, but we're not your typical auto component company, because they're investing 0.5% of their revenue. So I think investment in technology becomes extremely important. And then, of course, finally, access to talent. Good talent, great talent. We talk about India having, engineers, so many millions of engineers, come out of engineering school. How do we employ those people, and how do we really innovate? And this is what, even the last panel was talking about innovation. How do we build that innovation culture and allow people to fail? So that you can then succeed.
Absolutely. Miles, a question for you. Obviously, China controls 70% of lithium refining reserves. And there has been a move globally to kind of de-risk one's economy from the China Association for multiple reasons. How do you really see this transition to electrical mobility possible without the involvement of China? And how easy is it for any country to just turn around and say, I'm going to stop using fossil fuel and move to an electrical economy, to impact climate change positively? Is it that easy to do?
Well, I think as I was saying earlier, we need to recognize that there's many facets to that transition, and it's not being defeatist to say it'll probably take longer than we hope. And therefore we need to not take anything off the table. Keep it flexible. The more flexible the global economy is, the cheaper the transition will be and the easier it will be to bring everybody along with it. Whereas if we're sort of overly draconian and saying this is the only solution we're going to accept, then of course if there's any pressure on that particular solution pathway, then the entire transition is put at risk. On specifically raw materials and lithium and so on, and dependence on China for rare earths in particular, which obviously play a big role in the electrification challenge. I can't resist. I mean, yes, we absolutely need to de-risk that supply chain and expand the options worldwide. And I can't resist mentioning an initiative at from coming out of Oxford Earth Sciences. The way we mine these days, I don't know if you are aware of this, basically we find an ancient volcano that's long since extinct, and we dig it up, and about probably 0.1% of what we have to dig up is actually what we want. But if you go back to the source and find an active volcano, then these minerals are really concentrated. So our Earth Sciences here in Oxford are working on how we can actually extract the resources we need for the net zero transition from active volcanoes, which I think is so cool.
It is pretty cool.
But they don't actually go right out into the hot red stuff. You can talk to me over lunch if you want to know what they actually do. But it is, it's exploiting our understanding of the planet we live on to use resources in a much more efficient way, because mining is a big energy consumer. The way we do it at the moment is incredibly wasteful. Yeah. We rip off an entire mountaintop to get out 0.1% of the material. The rest of it is just thrown away. I mean, and so if we can identify these places where these crucial minerals are already concentrated by natural processes for us, then that'll definitely help to sort of
plus there are alternative chemistries right now that are being worked on.
Absolutely, and other ways, and of course, the work we're doing also in Oxford on perovskite photovoltaics, for example, which is a way of making photovoltaics much less dependent on the raw materials which are very much locked into certain geographies and certain jurisdictions in the world. So yes, de-risking the whole transition is incredibly important. It's something which we have to...
Great. So before we go into just a couple of questions from the audience, it would not be fair for the audience to actually go back home without an opportunity to put some money into their pockets. And for that, I'm going to ask both of you individually, where do you think is the most exciting opportunity in the mobility and sustainability space that you would actually put money behind?
As in a company, or you want
not company, just an area, or a company would be great. I think, actually, but company would be awesome. But
I think AI. From an automotive mobility perspective, I think AI, with everything that's happening in terms of not just AI for the product, but even for the manufacturing process, it's just transforming. I mean, we've adopted a lot of AI tools within our manufacturing process. It's just completely transformation in terms of what that's doing, to manufacturing and to our industry as a whole.
So AI in automotive and...
So I've got a very different answer. It's seldom that you can see a massive global industry coming down the track several decades ahead, which doesn't exist right now. And that industry is carbon dioxide disposal, permanent carbon dioxide disposal. Right now, we generate 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. That's faster than ever. We will generate... if we'd started trying to eliminate our production of carbon dioxide 20 years ago, we might have been able to achieve our climate goals by simply stopping using fossil fuels altogether. But we've gone past that point. It's too late. We will generate hundreds of billions of tons, best estimate around 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide between now and 2100 that will have to be safely captured and disposed of permanently if we're to meet our climate goals. That's a colossal challenge. It'll mean building an industry the size of today's natural gas industry in 20 or 30 years. And right now, it's barely begun. So if I was saying to two things are needed here. Entrepreneurs, of course, to step into that space and come up with clever ideas to particularly reduce the energy cost of capturing carbon dioxide and disposing of it. Right now, this will be the biggest single energy demand industry in the second half of this century. No, hear me out.
Yeah.
Hear me out. And because it's a real opportunity. So we have to cut the energy cost. That's the key, the energy cost of getting rid of carbon dioxide. That's where entrepreneurs should be focused. But we also need governments to put policies in place to make it mandatory. That if you're going to use this stuff, you've got to get rid of the CO2. Once we introduce that principle, that you've got to dispose of the CO2 generated by the products you sell and the activities you do, then we will move on rapidly through the transition, and we will see an explosive growth of this new industry, which is a great opportunity for the future.
Perfect. So you've heard it out here first. AI in automotive and then carbon dioxide disposal companies. So fantastic. We have time for one or two questions. Why don't we go with you?
Yeah, so I heard about what Sunjay talked about hydrogen power generation. What do you think about this as an alternate, and how you say that 10% of production will happen in India? Where do you see the progress that way?
I'm just going by what kind of initiatives the government is putting in place to promote green hydrogen. So I'm just going by, by that kind of data. There's a lot of investment happening with private sector as well to produce that kind of energy. If you look, I won't name companies here, but if you look at the companies, the larger companies, they're investing heavily in terms of building out green hydrogen. That's really the aim, and therefore all that investment is going into green hydrogen, and that's why.
Do you hear the adoption?
Sorry?
Do you hear an adoption or a test or a pilot? We don't hear
No, sir, let me add to that. Basically, green hydrogen right now is $5 a kg. And for it to basically become really attractive, it has to drop down to $1 a kg. And the R&D that's actually happening will probably take 7 to 8 years before we actually see it at $1 a kg. So right now, all of the stuff that's happening is actually happening at a lab level. There is no adoption because it's not commercially viable at this price.
There's a $45 to $50 billion
But it's huge. This is where the government of India is actually spending its time as an alternative. Yep. Last question.
Hi, I'm an automotive engineer, so really interesting things. My question to you is actually short. What do you think about battery recycling in India? Because I'm long on that.
Yeah, so it's a big industry. You've got Loha, you've got other companies like that. And I was going to say the other big bet is recycling. Not just in the battery space, in rubber recycling, tires, removing.
Your time was worth it just to come and hear this. You got 3 ideas to make money.
Yeah, so recycling is big.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sandeep,
Really
I just want to thank Sid for putting this together. I don't know where he is. There he is. Just for bringing us all together. Thanks so much, Sid.
Thank you. Thanks so much.